Good afternoon, everybody. This is Patrick from the Poison Pen Bookstore in Scottsdale, Arizona. And we're here with another of our virtual events. And it's always a treat to have our good friend Tess Gerritsen with us, virtually or in person. We have some schemes afoot to bring her back to the desert. And it's also really exciting to have a new Rizzoli and Isles book back. And here's the book here, Listen to Me. And we just got our signed copies from Tess. She's even dated a few for us. So I'll go ahead and put a link in the comments field if you'd like to order one. They are being snapped up really quickly. So, and also if you have questions for Tess, go ahead and put them in, and Barbara will bring me back on screen towards the end of the hour, and I would be happy to ask any questions you might have. So Barbara, over to you.
Oh, thank you very much, Patrick. Tess, it's lovely to see you. I hope you had a happy 4th of July weekend.
I did, and I'm in Maine right now, where we had a nice, cool weekend. So we appreciate that it's not too hot in Maine.
Well, that's all right. In February, we can talk about the difference between Maine and Scottsdale, but right now you clearly have the advantage. So this is Tess's actual National Book Launch. So I'm going to raise a little toast to her and to Rizzoli and Isles, and also to Angela Rizzoli, because if it weren't for Angela, Tess's mother, not Tess's, sorry, Rizzoli's mother, this book would have a different title, right?
It would. In fact, I was actually thinking about naming it Mrs. Rizzoli. That was going to be my title, and my publisher said, "No way, we don't. That doesn't sell anything." But I thought people would understand exactly what that was about.
Oh, I'm sure your series fan would. I'm sorry, maybe I've already had too much wine. Let's try it again. I'm sure that your series fans would, but Listen to Me is kind of that plaintive parent's cry that all of us as parents have uttered over the years. So I think it fits this book really well, because the truth is that Rizzoli doesn't really want to listen to her mother.
No, and it's funny. I never expected to write this book. I thought I was done with number 12. And I thought the series, it's completed. I don't really know where to go next with it. And it was again, Angela Rizzoli's voice, that mama voice that told me she needed another story.
I didn't realize you were, I mean, because you have written a number of standalones, some of them drawing on your own interest in music, because we've had, a book with a violin. You've done a joint event with a friend. We did one last year with your co-writer in Maine. So you've obviously thought about stories that don't fit Rizzoli and Isles.
I have, and as I get older, I think there are a lot of stories I want to tell, and I better do it now while I still can. So I feel this sort of sense of panic that these stories are kind of like sitting in my head, and I need to get them out as quickly as I can. And that's why I thought, okay, I can let Jane and Maura rest for a while, because first of all, I don't have a story for them, and I have all these other things I want to write. But somewhere Angela Rizzoli came into it, and she just said, if you see something, say something. And I thought, what is she seeing out her window? I really wanted to find out. So it was more fun for me, because I got to look into the voice of this, into the head of this character who's been there from the very beginning. She's been there since the first book, but she's never had a chance to tell us who she was.
Well, that's very true. And so you will gather, those of you watching this, that there are actually 3 narrative voices in this book. There's Jane Rizzoli, there's Maura Isles, but then there's Jane's mother, Angela, who actually has a significant part of the narrative to tell. And as it often happens with crime novels, even if we think there are like 2 completely disparate investigations going on, somehow or other, they all seem to dovetail in some mysterious way. I wonder if the author could be responsible for that, but somehow or other, there seems to be kind of a clue. But Tess, years ago, one of my mother's favorite authors, and one that the Library of Congress crime classics that Poison Pen Press publishes brought back, was a woman named Del Shannon, who also wrote as Elizabeth Linington, and she had one other pseudonym, I can't remember. But anyway, her big thing was that she wrote police procedurals back in probably the 50s for sure. And they were realistic in the sense that Lieutenant Luis Mendoza of the LAPD, who was great, would be working like 3 different cases, and they never dovetailed. They were just 3 different cases, that he was working at the LAPD. And one of them would be like the major case. So, it was like the pull-through case. but it was rare that any of the other cases would dovetail into that investigation. So it was a lot more like a working police department.
Well, this one, it's funny because it seems as if they do dovetail, but in the end, what I think you'll find out in this particular book is that even though we are watching various stories being woven together, the ending of their weaving together is really more an effect on Jane Rizzoli. Something she hears from her mother makes her realize, I've missed something in this other case.
Right.
Even though they're not necessarily related, there is something that's similar in both these situations.
Right. Yeah, you're right. It's not like one solves the other, but one inspires the thought that does that. I wonder how many really seasoned crime readers will figure out what's going on in Angela's neighborhood.
I don't know, because I didn't figure it out until 2/3 of the way through. And this is the way I always write my books. I just start with, oh, this is a great idea. Let's see where it goes. And then maybe halfway through, I think I have no idea what's going to happen. I don't know what I'm doing. And then I stop and I have a little plot block for a couple of weeks as I figure things out. And somewhere around there, the solution comes to me. And I think this is a process that many writers go through. We don't know what's happening. We have to find out.
Yeah, well, you've had lots of practice, so it probably is not panic inducing to you anymore, to be, well, maybe it is.
It is panic. Every single book is panic inducing. I mean, I think I can probably I can probably give you 2 books that I sort of knew what was going to happen. But I always get this plot block 2/3 of the way through when I think, I don't know, I've written myself into a corner. I need to go away from this and figure this out. And sometimes I think, oh, I'm just going to have to toss this whole thing because I really don't know where the story was going. But inevitably, and this is why I feel as if I can keep doing it this way, is I always figure my way out. I go for a long drive, or I lie on the couch and I will stare at the ceiling for hours. I mean, I'm seriously hours. I'm like a dead body on the couch. And I think what you're going through is you're trying to eliminate all the possibilities that don't work until you end up with the one that does work. And that's how I've always done it. It's not a fun way to write, because when you get to that stage in the book, you think you're a complete failure. I wish I could do it the way I know a lot of it seems to be the men writers do this the most, especially the attorneys. They have their plots all figured out. They've got their 50-page outline, and they don't end up the way I do, where I'm in a panic. I've tried doing it that way, and I've never been able to stick to an outline.
Well, you obviously have an active subconscious that, it does problem solving. I mean, I don't know. Do you think your training as a doctor helps you that way, kind of diagnostic skills?
Well, there is a little bit of a metaphor in that when you're trying to come up with a diagnosis, you are going through all these various, algorithms. That doesn't work. That doesn't work. That doesn't match. And maybe that's what I'm doing as I'm going through the algorithms of all the possibilities of why this is happening and who's doing it. And then you end up with the one that's really just perfect. But I don't really think of medical training as being very good for giving you insights into writing. I think that scientific training is actually a handicap, because we're taught so much to be logical as opposed to following your instincts. And that's what happens in fiction.
Well, I don't know. We could look at Michael Crichton, who actually, I think, was a doctor, but certainly a decent thriller writer. Robin Cook and his medical mysteries and so forth. Daniel Palmer, the late, I
But you do notice that medical doctors are in the minority. We have a lot more lawyers.
Well, yeah, we do. But, having had legal training myself, I can tell you that lawyers are trained differently. Lawyers are trained to do what if. We are trained to think ahead and say, okay, given this, then what if? And that's particularly true if you are doing something like estate planning or something. You have to think through all of the ramifications of, if this happens, then what if? And so it's a problem solving exercise that keeps throwing you forward.
That's like a great training for a novelist.
Well, it is. No, but I mean, I think that's why so many lawyers actually are in great shape. And I think reporters, their big strength is not only putting a story together in a logical way, although they have to reverse the way they tell it, because if you're writing a story, you put the conclusion at the beginning, so in case people don't want to read further. But reporters, it seems to me, are really good on dialogue because they have spent so much time interviewing people, and so they tend to have a particularly good ear.
Right, and picking up little nuances in people's faces and expressions. I think that's probably what they are really good at.
Yeah.
But there's so many ways to tell stories, and I guess it's always fun to me to see how people approach it differently. But
Yeah.
as I always say, if it works for you, that's great. And there are 1,000 ways to write a book.
That's absolutely true. There is no wrong or right way, and I'm always interested in our live events that we used to have, and which I keep hoping we're actually going to go back to. One of the most frequent questions that people would ask is about people's writing process, and could even be as basic as do you write in longhand, or do you work on a computer, or how many days, how many hours a day do you write, and whatever. And I'm never entirely sure why that question comes up. I'm not sure whether there's some hope that there be transference, if this works, then maybe it'll work or whether it's just curiosity because nobody really fully understands the creative process. I mean, they're perfectly valid questions. I'm not in any way saying that the questions aren't worthwhile and honest, but I always wonder why somebody's asking it.
I wonder if they want permission to write the way they write. They want somebody else to say, I write in longhand too. And they say, oh my God, thank heavens, I can do that. It's all right then. But you're right. I often find that the questions about process are the least interesting for most writers to answer.
Well, they are. And because there is no right or wrong way to do it, or no real transference, while they're interesting in a curiosity sort of a way, they don't actually have any practical application. But let's come back to the three narrators in the book. Jane's voice is still Jane. Mara, you have given her, based upon your own interests, I think. And this one, she's part of a musical group. So tell us about Moira, because really the big scary thing for Moira is not an investigation here, it's having to play in a concert.
That's exactly right. So, well, Maura, as you have, conveyed, she's very much me. And so a lot of the things that I do is what are the things that Maura do. So Maura plays the piano and I play the piano. And I know a lot of medical doctors who are musically trained, and there are a great deal of, there's a great deal of musical talent in any hospital, any medical school. And I know of a couple of musical groups that are just doctors. They get together and they play music, and they're good violinists, they're good pianists. So it seemed natural that Maura would belong to a doctor's musical group as well. And Maura is a perfectionist. She does not like to be publicly humiliated or embarrassed. And so this is one of the most terrifying things she's ever done, was to get up and be a soloist at this particular concert. So I loved seeing that aspect of her, because it really sort of reveals how uptight this poor woman is, and how she wants to be a perfectionist, and she's so afraid of being embarrassed that she doesn't even tell her friends to come and watch. She doesn't want them anywhere near when she makes a terrible mistake, which of course she doesn't, because she's perfect. But that leads to sort of a schism between her and Jane. Jane thinks, why didn't you tell me you're going to be performing? And it's really because Maura doesn't want to reveal to her friends that she's imperfect.
Very true. It's an aspect of her character that, well, I mean, she has a couple of interesting aspects in her life. One is her relationship with a priest that you have explored for a long time. And we can come back to that. But I wanted to ask you before we left the musical thing, how did you decide what Maura was going to play? How did you decide on the musical selection?
I actually went through a couple of scores. I thought, okay, well, I'm not going to make her play Rachmaninoff. That's going to be way too difficult. It's going to be something that an amateur could actually perform. And so I chose, I can't even remember what it is I chose. I think it was Mozart, a piece that I bought the entire piano score for that. And I thought, well, I could handle that. So Maura probably could too.
Ah, well, that's a good point. If it's good enough for you, it will work out for her. And that's, it's an interesting point that it does create some distance between her and Jane. But does it bring her closer to, is his name Daniel? Is that his name?
Daniel. Yeah, because Daniel understands, I think he understands her better than anybody. He knows that she is uptight, and he knows how important it is for her, for her pride to perform well. And their relationship is, it started way back in book 3, actually, in The Sinner, when it was just a little flirtation. And it's been fascinating to me to watch the reader reaction to her having an affair with a Catholic priest. Some people are going, yeah, right on. The priest in my church ran off with a woman too. And others are really offended because they said he's disobeying his vows. But I like to see people at their most human, people at their most, I guess at their most flawed. And you're seeing these two very flawed people find each other and find a form of happiness. And I want to say, and I feel this way about everything, we love who we love. You can't turn away from that. And that really is the story between Maura and Daniel Brophy. He remains a priest because he is devoted to his work at the church, but he cannot give up Maura either. And so they have this uneasy relationship that has, they found their equilibrium together.
Well, they can't go public with it, or at least not totally public with it, although he shows up at the concert, right?
He does.
He does.
And this is a great thing about Angela. So we've watched Angela, Jane's mom, over the years. She started off as a good Catholic housewife and a mom, and then she got divorced because her husband left her. And now she's coming around. She's become more mature, and she actually tells Maura, "It's okay. I understand why you love who you love, and that's all. It's fine with me." So we see this growth, this tolerance growing in Angela as well. These relationships don't happen in a vacuum. They happen in their same universe of characters. And these characters are going to be reacting to each other's relationships. So I found that part interesting as well. How does Angela react now? She's a good Catholic girl. How does she react to a priest having a continuing affair with a woman?
Well, it does sort of cut across, centuries of storytelling, and that, whole, the whole taboo thing of a priest, having any kind of physical relationship with somebody has been the subject of many a love story, many a tragedy, actually. And then, as you point out, sometimes it wasn't enough. There are priests today who've left the church in pursuit of, it's not always immutable, the vows. And nuns as well, I think, who've, taken vows. And so it doesn't seem to be as absolute as it once was, in the sense that
it's hard to ask human beings to deny such a powerful instinct, really. To ask them to give up, it's like saying, well, you can't drink wine anymore, or you can't eat, you have to starve yourself to death. I think that this urge to reproduce it can be a very, very powerful thing that is going to be hard to deny a whole group of people.
I've always blamed St. Paul, because in truth, the early Christian clergy were not celibate.
That's right.
That's right. This was something that came along later, and I definitely blame St. Paul. And if you really wanted to sex St. Paul, he has a pretty, I think he has an interesting pathology. So, it's easy for somebody, an aesthetic or somebody into the sort of thing that he was into, to foist that upon other people. Yeah. But I've always been sort of surprised that it lasted as long as it has, because as you point out, it really is against human nature.
Yeah. I also look at some other relationships. So the other one is Detective Barry Frost, who is Jane's partner. And he's been in the series from the very beginning, even though unfortunately he died in the TV show because the actor passed away. But in the books, Detective Frost is still alive, and he has had a troubled marriage. So we've watched his marital ups and downs, and we've watched his wife leave him, and now she's back, and they have an uneasy relationship. It's clear he desperately adores his wife, and he's going to stick by her. But the other people in his circle, Jane does not like her. And so you have this other, these other things that are going on in this universe of characters, people who like each other, people who don't like each other. And yet, because they are kind of a family, they just learn to live with each other.
So did the TV show affect in any way your storytelling? And now that it's over, does it not affect it, or does it still continue to echo?
Well, it was a problem for me to begin with because the actors look nothing like the characters that I imagine in my books. A large part of Jane's persona from the very beginning is that she feels unattractive, that she feels overlooked because she's not the gorgeous woman in the squad room. And then they cast Angie Harmon in the role, and she's so beautiful. So that kind of undercut a large part of what Jane's character was for me. I tried not to change my books in any way. I wanted it to be consistent across the universe of my stories, so that readers who don't watch the television show, they won't be kind of jarred if something all of a sudden changes.
What did you do? What did they do with Daniel and Mara?
They never introduced a Catholic priest in the TV show. And I thought, oh, that's one of the most dramatic parts of the whole story, but they did not. There were a couple of things they did. They were very clear about at the beginning of the television series. They said neither Jane nor Maura would get married because they wanted the show to focus entirely on the female friendship. But clearly, in my books, they do go on to have other relationships, but they remain the best of friends and very respectful partners of each other.
So is it easier to write them now that the TV thing is, not actually live running?
In a way, it is. It is. I feel free. I feel freer to do whatever I want to do with these stories and have them go in the way I want them to. I don't think that writing this Angela story would have clashed in any way with the television series because, to be honest, I was hearing Lorraine Bracco's voice whenever I was writing Angie's part. So the actress kind of seeped her way into my subconscious. But it does feel a little bit freeing now that they're back on my turf. My girls are home and I can do what I want with them.
Got it. So we haven't really talked about the story in the book. So what is Jane's story in the book, and what's Angela's? Mara, we know, is largely, her story is largely about the music and whatever, but what's going on with Jane first?
Well, Jane's story, she has a major murder to investigate, and it's the murder of an ICU nurse who's found bludgeoned at home late at night after she's returned from her evening shift. It looks at first like it's a robbery gone wrong because somebody came into the house and killed her, and nothing seems to be missing except for her laptop computer. So they're not really sure what's going on. And they, of course, talk to the neighbors. And one of the neighbors that they meet, this is another character I love, is a 14-year-old boy who lives down the street who happens to be African American. And it's interesting, when I was writing that scene where Jane is interviewing him, it was right during the Black Lives Matter riots that were going on. And because of what was happening with George Floyd, I think I felt much more sensitized to what it's like to be African American dealing with a police officer who may or may not consider you a suspect. So that interaction is uneasy on the part of both members. Jane is a little uneasy because she realizes she may be offending him or offending his mother, certainly. And the boy is a little bit afraid of what is going to happen next. But anyway, that relationship ends up being quite sweet because he also turns out to be the local IT kid on the block. All the older ladies who don't know how to turn on their televisions, and that might include me, they need a teenager to come in and help them. So he knows a lot about the victim because he was helping her with her internet. So as Jane is investigating why this nurse might have been killed, she follows the clues to the hospital where she worked. She follows the clues to something that the woman seemed to be investigating. The woman was doing kind of weird searches about a crime that had happened decades earlier in the state of Maine. What does that have to do with Sophia's murder? So that's the case that Jane is following. And in the meantime, she's being tormented by phone calls from her mother.
Sure. Listen to me.
Yeah, her mother keeps calling and saying, you gotta come over because there's something going on in my neighborhood. And Angela's issue is that new people have moved in across the street and they're odd. They shut their curtains. The husband is putting bars in the windows. The husband clearly has a concealed weapon on his waist. And Angela thinks they're up to no good. So she wants Jane to come and investigate. And that becomes a whole neighborhood fracas because everybody's gossiping in this neighborhood. They all have different theories, and they have Scrabble night on Thursday when they all gossip. And that's what I think the most fun for me were those Scrabble nights, because you get four people together and they all have different theories and they don't get along, and you get to see what it is like to be in the suburbs.
Well, I did think that Angela has a lack of respect for boundaries that really came into play in her neighborhood. And you depict the characters. You know, it's interesting how, I mean, it's a sort of rear window kind of a thing, isn't it?
Yeah,
And that there she is, and she looking directly across the street at the former Navy SEAL who's constantly working out, mostly, I mean, almost in the buff. And he's a senior. And then we have the mysterious couple, and her feelings are hurt because she expects to take, what is it that she,
Zucchini bread.
thank you, her famous zucchini bread, to welcome new people to the neighborhood, and they rebuff her. And they go inside and close the doors and all, and she's really offended by that. And then she begins to wonder, you know, what's their story? Why are they doing that? But you know, the character I thought was so interesting was the mother of the young IT Afro-American boy down the block. And she's really, if I can roll over into Asian American, I would call her a real tiger mom.
She was. She's protective, and in fact, the neighbor on the other side is Chinese. So we have this very integrated neighbor. This is the victim's neighborhood,
Right.
Right. And I also love the boy's mother, because I just put myself into her shoes. Here you are, African American. You see what happens to between police officers and young Black men. You see that things can go terribly wrong. So she is standing in that doorway. She is watching like a hawk, and she is not going to let the cops do anything bad to her son. And she's taping the whole thing on her phone.
Well, exactly. She's really wielding her phone like a weapon, you know, instead of like a gun to repel all invaders. You know, she's whipped out her cell phone and she is giving witness to what's going on, which, you know, is really what we're all doing these days. I mean, you can hardly make a move in public without somebody videoing you anymore. The concept of privacy is almost completely gone, or unwitnessed acts are almost completely gone.
Yeah. And to be honest, until George Floyd, because we didn't have as many video phones as we did before, we are seeing things we never knew existed. We are seeing things that happened that were always hidden before. So I think that it is a real bonus for certainly for victims that we do have camera phones.
Well, you know, it's a two-edged thing. Yes, it's wonderful to, you know, to witness cruelty and all the rest of it. But I also think in many ways it may be hampering law enforcement and ending up in a different kind of a cruelty. You know, it's harder for a cop to really act anymore without having to think first, you know, am I being recorded? And, you know, while events seem clear cut afterward, when you're in the middle of them, it isn't always entirely clear what's going on or what the right course is, and whether you ought to be, you know, I mean, I'm not talking about George Floyd, that's a different one, but I can see cases where a real threat might cause an action that, you know, once you get to the bottom, turned out not to be a real threat, but you couldn't know it at the time it was happening.
Yeah. No, as you said, it's a double-edged sword, but it's better, I think, than silence and burying things. I think it is important for us to see some of these things that are happening, and that I think that's why I felt, you know, because I was so affected by what I was seeing on the news, that particular scene came out the way it did. And the other thing I had to struggle with was, of course, what do you do with COVID? You know, I don't want to write a book about COVID. I don't even want to deal with the subject of COVID. We're all so sick of it. but I had to acknowledge that it had been there. And so one of the things I did do was my characters don't shake hands anymore, and they make a conscious effort not to shake hands anymore because they are aware. And then because the victim worked in a hospital, that is something else that Jane kind of thinks about as she's going up to the intensive care unit, that a lot of people died in this ICU last year. So that's the only nod I give to COVID, but I felt that to ignore it completely just didn't feel right.
Well, I agree that you can't ignore it completely, but I don't know that people really want to read about COVID, or that your book won't become rapidly dated if you stick with COVID, so to speak. So I think, social interactions may have changed permanently in some cases because of that. We've gotten less out of the habit of physically touching and so forth.
Mhm.
So, who knows whether we'll
Oh,
go back to that. And then you throw in the Me Too stuff and all. I mean, I'm inclined to pat my staff on the back, and I realize that, maybe my male staff members are going, wait, it's a Me Too moment. She's not supposed to touch me. And, I wouldn't have thought of that before because I'm just affectionate, but, it probably is a boundary breaking thing that I should be more aware of.
we all have to be more sensitive to everything these days, and sometimes it does get exhausting.
Mhm. I think it really does very much get exhausting when you're trying to keep up with all of the, nuances of acceptable behavior and so forth. So what are you working on now? If this is, how long has it been since you've written a Rizzoli and I meant to ask you.
5 years.
Has it been that long?
Right, but see, since between the last one and this one, I wrote the book with Gary, and then I wrote the Gothic ghost story.
Right.
Right, and now I'm just about finished. I'm on the third draft now of a book that's a bit of a spy novel. It's about I think I might have told you, it's about my little town in Maine, although I've turned it into a fictional town. And about 30 years ago, when we moved here, I became aware of the fact we have a lot of retired CIA people here. And I had 2 spies in my road, and I got intrigued by the idea of, what do retired spies do? Why are they all here? Why are they hiding in my woods? And what if one of them finds a dead body in his driveway? Is that something that goes back to their past? So that's the story I'm working now. It's about, again, I'm interested in people as they get older. And that's part of why Mrs. Rizzoli was interesting to me. And now I'm writing about a group of 5 spies who are all in their 60s, early 70s. And they have pretty much a century's worth of experience under their belts. They know a lot of things, and now crime has come to their little corner of Maine. And the local cop doesn't know who these people are. So it's kind of fun to see that the young female cop have to deal with these older people, not realize who she's really dealing with.
Yeah, that's a really interesting premise. There was a terrific book written some time ago, I can't remember the title of it, about what happens when a spy becomes, suffers dementia or Alzheimer's, and how dangerous is that? Because if they have information or secrets that, could be revealed by accident. And so in that particular book, the CIA ends up hunting down one of its own, in order to eliminate the leak, which might be extreme, but
Yeah.
but still, it's an interesting question about, aging brains and people who are full of official secrets. And what does that mean?
I love the idea also that young people don't really respect or aren't really aware of what older people know. Aren't aware of how capable they still can be at 65 and 70. And here's this young female cop who comes in, barrels into this murder investigation without realizing she's got like 5 really brilliant people that could help her, and that are actually conducting their own sort of quiet investigation. And she doesn't respect them until suddenly something happens where she realizes, oh my gosh, I need to start listening to these old folks. And so I love that generational disparity between these 2 sets of characters.
Well, I think it's a fascinating one to explore. The book I was trying to think of was called Once a Spy, by
Uh-huh.
Keith Thompson, and I think he wrote a couple of sequels to it, but the original one is a son investigating the strange death of his father, whom he always thought was a washing machine salesman. And well, that was the dad's, cover, so to speak.
Yeah.
And then, what happens, and recently, a couple of our really good spy authors, Dan Fesperman, who I think is wonderful, and Joseph Cannon, who, again, brilliant, are both looking at spies for East Germany now that, we've moved on from the wall coming down, and they're both looking at the fallout for people who worked, the Stasi in
Yeah.
East Germany, and now they're aging, and what kind of secrets do they have? What will happen if things are being revealed? And, the truth is, Tess, that as we keep living longer, our lives are becoming history, yours and mine. And so things that, were contemporary for us years ago have now become historical. I mean, I remember when I opened the store in 1989, the 1920s was considered too close to really be historical. And now it's the 1950s when I was a teenager, who's now become the stuff of historical fiction, the 50s and 60s. And I think, wow, it's interesting how, and it's interesting to discover things about events that we lived through that we were not aware of.
Yeah, well, just the rotary telephone. I mean, our kids don't have any idea what a rotary telephone is anymore. So, and we, I mean, we remember the days back before the internet. I remember when we got letters or phone calls as opposed to fax machines and emails. So it seems very quaint right now.
Well, it does seem, but the other I find intriguing in spy fiction is that since everything is hackable today, that spies are going back to old tradecraft. They're going back to drop boxes and letters and newspapers and, written communication and stuff, that because there's no digital trail to it.
Right?
And so I think it's fascinating that a digital world is actually forcing, in some cases, a retrogression back to before, because it's safer, because information was more private.
Well, you can always burn paper.
That's right. No, absolutely true. Chew it up and swallow it, or whatever it is they used to do. Yeah, fascinating stuff. So let's call Patrick up and see what Patrick might like to contribute to our conversation, or maybe we have questions.
Let's see. Hello. Yes, we do have questions. Let's see. Okay. Give me just a sec here. Okay, yeah, Vicky would like to know, do you have a writing routine? And if so, has it changed over the years?
My writing routine has changed in that I think I'm less productive. I'm not as fast as I used to be, but the same routine applies in that I still write my first drafts with pen and paper on online typing paper, and then I type it in myself after I finish that first draft. I have a couple of other things that I do. I try not to edit while I'm doing my first draft. I just want to keep going forward. I want that forward motion. And what it means is that my first drafts are a total mess. So I have to do like 5, 6, 7 drafts before I'm happy with the story. But I haven't been able to change that process. I haven't been able to get away from writing first drafts with pen and paper. I can type really fast. I just can't compose in front of a computer.
How many hours a day do you try to put in, or do you approach it that way?
I don't really approach it that way. It's more like, did I get my 4 pages in? Okay, I'm going to go outside now. I think it's more a productivity thing than an hours put at the desk thing.
Gotcha. Let's see. Okay, Stefania, who's our new fan from Italy, has been tuning into a lot of our programs. She says, "Why did you choose an Italian-American character in Rizzoli? Do you have a special relationship with Italy?"
Well, first of all, I've been to Italy so many times because I love Italy. But it also is because we have a large Italian population in Boston. And I think I was driving downtown Boston and I saw a sign for a Rizzoli restaurant. And that was just like, it stuck with me. And that was just the name that I wanted to use. And also remember that Jane Rizzoli was not really the main character in that first book. So I never realized that she was going to be so important at last for 13 books. But anyway, that's how the name Rizzoli came about. I saw it on a sign in Boston. And then when I went to Italy, I see the name Rizzoli all over the place.
Well, but one of your standalones with the violin, that was a book that also has Italy very heavily. I'm trying to remember which one, what was it
That was
called?
playing with fire. And that
Here it is.
Yeah, that was
Right, so you were on the trail of it. Was it a Stradivari or a Cremona? What was it?
well, that happened because I had a nightmare when I was in Venice, and it was about the Italian Holocaust, and the 246 Jews who perished in Venice, and it was about music, and it was about violins, because of course Italy, the land of violins, Cremona. And then Italy keeps showing up in a lot of my books. It's funny. It seems like whenever I need to go to a foreign country, I want to take it to Italy.
Here you are.
Let's see, in your town in Maine, the question has to do with, are you inspired? Do you find the state of Maine and your little area, does it inspire you for fiction?
Oh, it absolutely does. I mean, not just a spy novel, which, is based on the fact that there are a lot of spies up here. But my last book, The Shape of Night, that one was totally inspired by being on the seacoast here, by living in a state where we have a lot of sea captains' houses. And it is also a state that is rumored to be one of the most haunted in the country. So yeah, there are a lot of things about this, just the sound of the ocean. Those are very evocative, and I think that they make me want to write more about the sea.
Let's see here. Okay. Okay, yeah, Vicky again would like to know, who is your favorite character in the series and why?
Oh,
It's a toughie.
that's a toughie because I mean, I love both Jane and Maura. Maura is like me, but I feel that Maura is a bit boring. So I would say I like Jane a lot more. But now that I finished this book, I think maybe Angela is my favorite character. I think she's changed a lot. I think I identify with her as a middle-aged woman or an older woman who tries to get her kids to listen to her. So maybe I've changed my mind. Maybe it is Angela. That's my favorite character.
Do you find that they're actually different sides of your own personality, rather than?
Yeah, I think that every writer is kind of fractures their own personality and decides which little piece they're going to put into their characters. Maura is so much like me that I don't really feel like I'm showing you parts of me in her. It's like she's the whole thing. Jane Rizzoli is really the character I wish I was. I would love to be as brave and as brash and as willing to take risks as Jane Rizzoli does, but I'm not.
It's interesting. I've brought this up a few times with different writers. Ian Rankin said something just kind of in passing that I thought was really interesting, which was that in his character, Rebus, Inspector Rebus, he finds himself through the character exploring questions that bother him, and things around him, and kind of working things out for himself through his character. Do you find yourself doing a similar thing at all?
I think what I find myself doing is learning to accept different parts of myself. I was talking about this perfectionism of Maura and her unwillingness to make mistakes in public on the stage. And I realize that is a flaw, but I think in writing it and making it real and putting it on the page, I have decided that that's just something that people have to learn to accept about themselves, that they are going to be perfectionistic and they can't change that, and just live with it.
Right. Let's see, Natalie, she says, do you read comments written by reviewers, for example, Goodreads, things like that?
I try not to, but I'm in
Rabbit hole.
You're like a moth to the flame, right? You can't help it. All right, let's go see what Goodreads is saying now. It's hard to avoid looking at them, and I know some authors are very good at avoiding it. But when your book is just about to come out, you just want to see how people are reacting to it. I have learned that eventually it's just not good, that you need to just shut it off and go write your own book, because you're always, and this is the other thing funny that's about writers. They can have like 10 great reviews, but then there'll be one that really is rotten. And that's the one they will focus on. That's the one they remember. The one bad review and 100.
There was a question here somewhere about, I'm sorry, I've lost the exact thread, but it had to do with your early kind of romantic suspense novels.
Yeah, I was going to bring that up, Patrick, because this is what, 22 books as Tess Gerritsen.
Yeah.
But you wrote some books for Harlequin back before you started writing crime. We've talked about that in your many appearances at the store, but maybe there's a bunch of people watching it that aren't aware of that.
Well, I wrote under the name Tess Gerritsen for those books as well. So it can be very confusing for people to pick up an old romantic suspense novel and go, wait a minute, what is all this love story stuff here? So, but I enjoyed writing romantic suspense. I wrote that genre because that's what I was reading a lot of back then. But anyway, if you see a book that comes out of that's published by Harlequin or by I'm trying to remember the name of their Mira, then you'll know that it is a romantic suspense novel. It's one of my earlier ones. They're not in a series, but they were fun to write.
Was that a good apprenticeship for you as well? Kind of learning how to create a story and having that structure in place?
I think the apprenticeship for me was learning how to become comfortable with my process. I wrote a book called Call After Midnight, loved that book. And then I had second book syndrome, which meant for a couple of years, I just could not finish that second book because I just thought this should happen, but it wasn't happening. And that's when I realized I should just trust my instincts, just write the book and you'll figure it out as you go along. And that was what taught me that my process was okay and that I needed to be comfortable with it.
So what inspired you to move into crime?
Okay. Romantic suspense already has, like 50% crime in it. So crime was already in the stories. None of them were pure romance. It all happened because I had the idea for the book Harvest. I was having a conversation with a cop who told me about kids disappearing from the streets of Moscow. And the Russian cops thought these kids were being sent to the Middle East as organ donors. So that whole idea of kids being kidnapped and sacrificed for their organs so horrified me. Of course, I had to turn it into a book. And that was clearly not a romance novel.
Oh.
So I wrote, anyway, that was my first medical thriller. And my agent, Meg Ruley, who's still my agent all these years later, said she was the one who got me a fairly big deal. And I moved into a hardcover publisher, and that was my first time on the bestseller list. And that marked my change from romantic suspense to thrillers.
Right.
I love romantic suspense. I actually spent this weekend reading several that in part because we're going to host some. It's a wonderful book called In Her Boots by KJ Del Antonio, which I would have missed entirely if we hadn't agreed to do an event for her on July 14th. I absolutely loved it. It's set in Vermont, has goats. It has, all this wonderful stuff in it. And as you point out, there are, if not actual crimes, certainly elements of suspense. And Tess, I should send you a copy of this because a lot of it is about mother and daughter and, listen to me kind of things. Very, very powerful dynamic, mothers and daughters and not listening.
I think, when I was a teenager, when I was a young adult, I used to love those Victoria Holt books. Do you remember those?
Yes. Oh, please. Yes.
Yes, I know. Those are wonderful. Those are romantic suspense, Gothic suspense. And they were atmospheric and they didn't have a lot of sex, but they still had that suspense element to them. I thought those were wonderful books.
Mary Stewart, a whole bunch of them. I still have my tattered old hardcovers hidden away here. So if I ever retire and don't have to read crime all the time, I'm going to go back and revisit all of my favorite. It was huge in the 70s and the 80s, maybe the 60s through the 80s was just this enormous wave of romantic suspense led by, as you point out, Victoria Holt and Mary Stewart, but with some other really good authors as well. Phyllis Whitney, who lived to be 100. Do you remember Phyllis Whitney? She was a stalwart at Malice Domestic.
Oh yeah, no, she was one of the greats, and
absolutely.
Yeah, but we don't see as much of that anymore.
No, it's kind of fallen out of fashion, but as with everything in publishing, it's swinging back, and I was really pleased to see. I read I just can't read crime all the time. I read at least 3 over the weekend that I really like that are, in the, we're calling it actually relationship books.
Well,
But
that
there's
sounds
plenty of
boring.
suspense in them. Yeah, I like them a lot. It was nice. It was like a palate cleanser, so
Sure.
very helpful. Right,
Did,
Patrick,
did,
I probably never could get you to read one, but I'm telling you, a couple of them were just
well,
fabulous.
maybe one of these days. Well, did Barbara Michaels write that style as well?
Yeah, well, Barbara Michaels was also Elizabeth Peters, as
Right.
you know. Hers were more supernatural. I mean, they were romantic suspense, but she liked to write, ghost stories and other stuff. So that was kind of her Gothic-y, which has also made a comeback now, because we're seeing, as I keep saying, the rise of the new Gothic, like the new Riley Sager book, which you can't explain any other way other than Riley decided to write a Gothic. I mean, truly, it actually is. So yeah, that was the Barbara Michaels thing. I'm really pleased to see the Gothic returning. I love the Hacienda, the Isabel Cañas debut, which I thought was, and it's actually called, are you ready for this? The subgenre is called Colonial Gothic, because it takes place in Mexico in 1823. So now we have like the Colonial Gothic, subgenre, the whole bit. It's so much fun to see it all developing again. But publishing does that. It goes in these tracks, like religious conspiracy thrillers just saturated the market after the Da Vinci Code. And then it fades away and then something else comes along. Yeah.
What about the medical thriller? I mean, the technology, as with everything, has changed the game so much.
Yeah.
How do you keep up, Tess, or do you try to?
I don't try to so much. I mean, now that I'm working with Jane and Maura, it's pathology, and that hasn't changed too much.
Yeah.
I mean, except for forensics, that's changed quite a bit. But the actual the work of doing an autopsy has not varied that much. And I find that when you talk about medical technology, most readers don't care. They don't care about the latest hot new thing about blood tests. They really still care about the characters. So I focus more on the conflicts and the emotional ups and downs of whoever these people are. And medicine just ends up being like a little spice to it.
It is incredible what's going on.
It is, but if you really think about it, a hospital is just like an Agatha Christie country house murder. I mean, it's a closed environment. It really is. It's a sort of
not as interesting.
No, but still, the medical thrillers generally don't embrace, multitudes of strangers coming in from the outside. It's usually more about the people who work inside the hospital.
Yeah.
Let's see. Who do you like to read, Tess?
I tend to like to read. It's funny. I like to read nonfiction, and I don't think I'm that unusual when it comes to a lot of novelists. We work all day with these imaginary people in our heads, and then we get down. I go to bed and I want to pick up a book where I'm going to learn something. And I'm reading a book now called, this is really terrible. I'm awful at titles, but the author's name is Ed Yong, and it's about how animals see the world differently from humans. You walk into a dark room, and of course we are blind, but the bat is not blind. The mouse can hear, the elephant can hear, the cat can see, the dog can hear and smell. And so the world it's almost like a different dimension if you think of it about what is an animal sense.
Sounds fascinating.
Yeah.
What's it called? Do you remember?
The author's name is Ed Yong, Y-O-N-G. I think he's a British scientific writer. He won the Pulitzer Prize for one of his books earlier.
Okay.
Oh, you can look it up, and I can recommend on television, Sir David Attenborough has actually done some groundbreaking TV in which he's showing us the world using lenses in the camera and so forth, the way some of these animals would see it. And it's fascinating to watch it and recognize how much of the world is completely hidden from us.
Right. I mean, we think we're such hot stuff, but really compare us to something like a bird that can navigate from one end of the world to the other.
That's right. Or I go outside and watch my puppies when the wind's blowing, and there's a current, I know, an absolute current of sense flowing by them that's that I can't smell, but you can see them lifting their head into it, and it's like a whole language going by them.
So that's the kind of, I mean, I think that nonfiction is always fascinating, and I always end up learning something that I want to use.
Anything else, Pete?
Well, let me just jump over to YouTube real quick. Oh, here we go. This is a great question too. Tracy would like to know, do you have a story that you'd like to write, but it scares the heck out of you?
Ooh.
Well, in terms of scaring the heck out of me, I don't know whether that means that the story itself scares me or the challenge of it scares me. Very few subjects scare me. I mean, I would be willing to deal with a lot of stuff, a lot of different subjects, but there are challenges that make me think, I'm going to spend the rest of my life doing this. I'm not sure I really want to. I mean, I have an idea. I wanted to write a novel about the history of anesthesia, the beginnings of it down in Georgia. And what was the first case? What was the first operation that was done with anesthesia? And what were all the, there's a lot of rivalry going on among doctors. I mean, you don't have to remember, this is, who wanted to be the first. So there's a political thing, there's the emotional thing of somebody who's got a tumor, how are they going to get that out? And then there is the ultimate horror of what it was like back then to have surgery without anesthesia. So those are all fascinating to me. Also, they're kind of in my wheelhouse because of the medicine. But again,
when would this have been, Tess? Would this have been 1890s or 1910?
Yes, it'd be in the 1800s.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's a very powerful story about a woman who had a tumor. I think it was a uterine tumor, and everybody thought she was pregnant, but time went on and she didn't deliver. And eventually a very brave doctor, and she was a very brave patient, operated on her without anesthesia, without any kind of modern sanitary measures, whatever it all is. And she survived it, which was astonishing because most people died from the shock.
Right. And I dealt with some of that in my book, The Bone Garden, where I wrote about an arm being amputated without anesthesia. And that I think most people were completely horrified by that scene, but it was just the kind of scene that was happening on Civil War battlegrounds all the time.
Yeah, well, alcohol was what they had. And, when they were smart, they poured it over the wound as well. But then they cauterized it, which I think must have been even worse than the actual operation, but it was the only way they could try to prevent gangrene. So it was truly barbaric.
So anyway, I think there's a story there. I just don't know if if I'm ready to devote the years it's going to take to do that story justice.
Well, we'll find out, won't we? So we can look forward to Tess's 23rd book, which we already know is going to involve ancient spies, or at least retired spies, somewhere in May, which I can hardly wait to read, which sounds great. One of the reasons I love Tess is you're never entirely sure what you're going to get, which makes it lots of fun to read her books. We've had a long history together, and I certainly hope that with your next book, we'll get to see you live in Scottsdale, which would be very exciting. I hope so.
And thank you, Barbara, because you were one of the first to host me when my book Harvest came out. And,
that's very true. But we're coming up on year 33 in October. In fact, John Sanford is going to celebrate our 33rd birthday with us, Patrick, if you happen to look that far.
October 3rd.
October 3rd, which I think is very exciting. So in the course of 33 years almost, we've had the pleasure of doing a lot of wonderful things with a lot of authors. It's just been astounding. Anyway, thank you all very much for joining us. Tess, thank you very much for spending time with us. If you are not done yet, join us in about 28 minutes when Brad Thor will do his national book launch for his new book. I love this cover too, Rising Tiger. So I'm going to go and put on my one Chinese garment I bought in China in 1997. So I can host it authentically. Anyway, good night, everybody. Thank you so much. Hello. We hope you're enjoying our programs and podcasts with authors. We'd like to expand them, and your help would be appreciated. Please make a donation at poisonedpenfoundation.org. 100% of the proceeds will go to help connect authors with readers in this difficult time. Thank you.